Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. In this Notorious USA collection, Death of a Cheerleader, New York Times bestselling author Gregg Olsen and true crime journalist Kevin M. Sullivan write about notorious crimes in the Bluegrass State. In a scene right out of Hitchcock's Rear Window, a young woman vanishes from a beach on a summer day, and a neighbor views the abduction through his telescope. A newlywed disposes of his bride but doesn't know what to do with her head. Selling tickets at a drive-in movie theater proves deadly, and a parent's worst nightmare becomes reality. Their young daughter disappears from a sleepover. The focus of the program this evening is Death of a Cheerleader with my special guest, journalist and author, Kevin M. Sullivan. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Kevin M. Sullivan.
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be back, and I expect we're going to have a good time tonight because the cases we'll be talking about are very bizarre homicides and really little-known homicides outside of the state of Kentucky. That is until now.
Yes, it's incredible.
Of the book.
It's an incredible collection, and it is strange to realize that it comes from just one little state, and a state that's maybe not so notorious, really, compared to some of the other states of the United States. So let's get right into this, and very interesting, too. Each title has got sort of a tongue-in-cheek sometimes, too, where titles like A Day at the Beach. First off, other than give us your Kentucky background for those people that don't know and why it was important for you to... What was it about these particular cases that you wanted to assemble for this book? Why these cases and why Kentucky? Tell us about that.
Well, occasionally I would hear about a case. A Day at the Beach was a good example of one. And this particular case, when this girl, and her name was Heather Teague, when she disappeared from a beach along the Ohio River at Henderson, Kentucky, there was a little bit in the paper about it, but not much. But the circumstances of it were very strange. Of course, that piqued my interest immediately. I was working on something else, but I thought, I need to find out about the case. And then there was another case that I included in this book, Death of a Cheerleader, and that's the title of the book, about a girl that was murdered here in Kentucky. So these cases came about. I mean, I would hear them. Sometimes I would catalog things. And then after I reached the place where I thought there are enough strange cases out of Kentucky that I can compile them together. That's when I started doing research and of the cases. Some of them were more recent, and some of them were from a long time ago. And those we'll get into later. They were very interesting in as much as how do you get the information? Where do you go to get it? It's going to be in the archives somewhere of a police department, but you got to have dates, you got to have names, and when they're long ago cases, sometimes all you carry is an idea of what happened, what was reported at the time. But boy, it's something having to track this stuff down. But I was very fortunate. I've always been good at doing research and getting to things, so I never had a whole lot of problems of getting to it, but it was time consuming. So that it was my idea to put together something from the state of Kentucky, from all these bizarre cases, and every state has them. But some of the cases that in this particular book, I've only included 6, but I've compiled many cases, and I'll have another book coming out later from Wild Blue Press having to do with other Kentucky murders. And I used to also write for a paper here in Kentucky, and that paper was called Snitch, and it was a weekly print newspaper. At one point in time, it was published in 5 states, and in Kentucky, it was published in both Lexington and Louisville. I wasn't on staff, but I was a contributing writer, and some of these cases would be published in Snitch. So there was a lot of material out there, even from a state with, somewhere around maybe a little bit less than 4 million people. So, yeah, there's just some real, bizarre stuff that's happened. And then, like I say, every state has them. And for people who want to take the time to track those strange cases down over years, they can come up with some really wild stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, I racked my brain to say what we talked about just briefly before the program, and I said, what would really tie all these cases together? What real theme is there? And there really isn't any other than they're from Kentucky, but also that these stories, and I want to warn anybody that's going to, listen to this, that really the thing that ties these things together is they're right out of the Twilight Zone, if people remember what that is, in terms of never mind twists and turns. These are truly, you've really managed to come up with some strange and bizarre cases. So let's get to this one, and for those that really don't know, because we do have a younger, some people are younger that listen to this program, and some people are older like me. But anyway, I wanted to ask was, for those that don't know the Alfred Hitchcock Rear Window reference, let's talk about this case and the witness and the entire case itself with Heather Teague one day at this Newburgh Beach in Henderson. So tell us a little bit about this and a little bit about Tim Walthall, who ends up being an interesting character in this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case. This is one case where there had been nothing written about it outside of some squibs in some newspapers. I had to piece the entire story together from interviews of Kentucky State police officers and, of course, from Tim Walthall and his wife Karen. Heather Teague was a pretty girl, and she had, she was just like anybody. And she was, she was in her, I can't remember, I think she was like 22, 23. I'd have to check. It's been so many years since I've actually written the case. I've done so many things since then, but she was just a young girl. She was still kind of trying to find her way in life. But she took a Saturday, a really nice day in August, and went to a place called Newburgh Beach, which was at the Ohio River at Henderson, Kentucky. And, of course, across the river is Indiana. Well, this beach would occasionally be the spot for people to come. Kids would come and, drink beer at night. And some people that got involved with drugs, they would come. But a lot of those activities occurred at night. On the day she was there were the spot that she went to, she had to actually park her car along an access road that was shrouded in trees. And when she parked her car, there were other cars that either were parked there or would soon be parked there. And there were some kids riding some ATVs, small terrain vehicles, about a half a mile upstream from her. And they would occasionally come down near to her, and I'm sure that they never even saw her. Well, what she did, she got a chase lounge, and she got her cooler and her towel, and she went and placed the chase lounge at the bottom, right at the water's edge, so she could dangle her feet in it. Now, across the river, now, I say this in the book, that she would have noticed the homes across the river. It's like a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile. She really wouldn't have paid a whole lot of attention to them, and they're really nice homes. But if there's nobody out there and nobody can see you, it's very private. She wouldn't have paid a lot of attention to them. Well, there was this man named Tim Walthall. He had a telescope that was in his living room, and they had a large window there. And he used to love to look at the wildlife. And when people weren't around, there would be deer, and He might have seen coyotes, but there was a lot of wildlife, and he enjoyed looking at that. Well, this was a Saturday. He and his wife had been out working in the yard, and so when she went to fix them some hamburgers, he came in from the yard and sat down, and he was looking through there, and he happened to spot this woman that was laying there on the beach. And he wouldn't have even seen her, except he had seen a kid coming down on an ATV, and as he got near to her, he spotted her. And he happened to mention to his wife, there's a lady laying out there all alone. And he thought that was kind of odd because, like I said, at nighttime anyway, there were unsavory characters that would come around there. But this was a beautiful day. Well, he had only been looking at her a few minutes when he spotted a man crouching in the woods looking at her. And his first thought was, well, maybe he knows her. And then the guy stands up and he takes, and she can't see him. She's unbuttoned the back of her top, her bathing suit top. It's a two-piece, so that she would get an even tan. And she was laying face down on the chase rounds. So he starts bounding out of the woods, takes about 10 steps and stops, and he takes another. Finally, he gets to her, and Walthall said to me, he said, I thought for a second maybe it's her boyfriend. Then he saw him bend down and took his hand and he wrapped her hair around his wrists and arm, and then he saw that the man had a gun in his hand. Well, the girl was soon abducted, and he yanked her up off the chair, and there's nobody seeing this but Tim Walthall. And within moments, he had got her out of sight, and they were gone. So he calls as I recall, the Indiana State Police. They said, well, that's not our jurisdiction, so they transferred him. The Kentucky State Police, and a lot of times operators they'll take their time and they want information. He said, I gotta talk to somebody now. There's a girl that's been abducted. So he got hold of a man, the commander of post, I believe it was 16 of the Kentucky State Police, a guy named Lieutenant David Osborne, and he filled him in. So that's how that case began. And I'm going to give you time to ask questions, but that girl has never been located. But over a period of days, a suspect appeared because of some anonymous calls. And then he had been a suspect in some other things. It's never been proven that he's done this, but his name was Martin, and they called him Marty Dill. And the police believe there's a lot of circumstantial evidence against him. So whoever got this girl, they got her out of the way. Osborne, he got his men together, and, man, they just flat did it. They got to that I'm sorry, I have to back up a little bit. As Osborne was gathering his men, he said, I think one of my troopers is over there. It just came from Newburgh Beach. And this was 1995. He said, and he has a cell phone. So he said, I guess he had him call him. So he called Tim, and Tim couldn't see his patrol car approaching, but he said, I saw a plume of dust coming up over the trees, and I knew that was him. And within a few minutes, the cop had parked his car just about where Heather's car was. There were other cars there, too. Came down through there, and Osborne is talking on the phone, and he's talking on his cell phone not Osborne, Tim Walthall and the police officer are talking. And Tim is actually showing him where to go on the beach so he doesn't miss the girl's stuff. And then he said, oh, I see it, I've got it. And within no time, Osborne came down there. And so then that, happened, and they stopped a couple cars. But this guy was long gone. Now, there was a man that was videotaping that morning because the ATVs I mentioned, there were a lot of kids that were tearing up land using those vehicles. And so a farmer had hired this guy to videotape, and he had accidentally left his video recorder on and placed it on the dashboard. And he passed down this access road, and he caught Heather's car, and he actually caught her. And that morning when she was getting out of the car, and there was also a red and white Bronco that was parked there. And they believe whoever was driving that Bronco is the one that abducted Heather Teague. And it turns out that they put out, what's the thing, the facial things,
composite,
like the description of the,
composite,
the composite of it. Yeah. They put that out, and they got a call like a couple days later and said there's a guy that fits the description. It's an anonymous call. He said his name is Marvin Dill. They call him Marty, and he drives a red and white Bronco. Well, this guy, so they start the wheels kind of moving in this direction, right? They also obtain information that this Dill fella is also, and this all happened very quickly, had also been a suspect in a sexual attack on a woman a number of months early in a cemetery in Kentucky as she was cutting grass. And he was a suspect in this other attack because there were anonymous calls there as well. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, did Tim, when Tim did the composite it, when he was given the photo of this Dill, Marty Dill, what did he then say?
Well, here's what he said about that, and he set up the telescope for me. I was able to look through it when I was there interviewing him. You can see everything. I mean, it's really clear. You can. So this guy that abducted Heather Teague, he said I could see the body shape, the protruding belly. I could see the shorts he wore very clearly. He said the only thing I couldn't see clearly, and I couldn't understand this, was his face. At some point, it looked like he had a beard, at some point he did, but it wasn't clear, but I could see everything else. Now, he couldn't find any answer for that, and he told the police that. But he said everything else was clear. Well, Bill, who was a suspect in this sexual assault in a cemetery in Kentucky a number of months before, and the girl could not completely identify him there either, because the guy that did that to her had like a fish netting thing on his face, like a hat and like some fish net. And so it obscured. Yeah. So she wasn't quite sure. She couldn't say for a certainty. Well, it turns out this Dill fella, before the abduction of Heather Teague, had also gotten in trouble in Evansville, Indiana, he had been circling a place called Haney's Corner, and it appeared that he was trying to pick up girls. And so he was pulled over by the police in Evansville, and the first thing the officer did, he said, "Do you have any weapons on you?" He said, "No." And he said, "Well, I need you to get out of your truck." And he did. And they did a check of the seat and under the seat, and they found 2 pistols. And then they checked and found a knife in his pocket, so he was immediately under arrest. But the interesting thing was, and I talked to the detective, the Evansville detective, about this, but they found in his pocket duct tape, and they found a rope and a shovel and plastic bags in his car. And I asked the detective about that, and here's what he said to me. He said, "Well, I thought this guy was going to take a girl, and if we didn't arrest him, he's going to kill somebody today. Because here, like for instance, he's lying about weapons. He's circling Haney's Corner. He's trying to pick up girls. He's got duct tape on him. He's got rope. He's got a shovel. He's got plastic bags. I felt like he's going to kill somebody today. So that's what he told me. That's what it looked like. I'm sure that's what it looked like to the patrol officers. So he made bail. He had a court date coming up, and when he left Indiana, he would never step foot back in Indiana again. He got back to Kentucky, and this other stuff happened. So when everything, and this is very curious because there's no hard evidence against Dill, but there's a ton of circumstantial evidence, in as much as there's people calling and reporting him. There is the body type that Walthall saw when all this was over and he got to view Dill. He could see it was the same. And there were some other circumstances as well. Well, all this happened over a period of about 4 days where it really started coming down on Dill. I think, and I'd have to check the book, but I think they got up to 5 anonymous calls from different people about Marty Dill and the possibility of him being involved in the abduction of Heather Keith. So the police, got a warrant, and before they went out to his property, they got a call from Dill's attorney. They said Dill was threatening suicide. He had put his wife and child off of the land. He lived on land, about 2 acres, that had been deeded to him from his father. His father owned about 22 acres, and he deeded, a number of years before this, a couple acres to his son. And I think he had a trailer, and he and his wife and his child lived there. So the attorney said he threatened to kill himself, and he told his wife, I'm looking at 10 to 20, and I'm not going. Well, that's part of the circumstantial evidence against him. This guy is showing all the signs of having done something very bad. I mean, if Dill had not, in their minds, if Dill had not been involved with this, why would he be putting his wife and daughter off the property, making statements like I'm looking at 10 to, or I'm looking at 20 to life, and I'm not going, if he hadn't done something terrible. So Osborne, who was at the helm of this, he went very slowly with it. They got the warrant. They sent men ahead of even the warrant to make sure that he didn't leave. They had already been told by the attorney that the Bronco is on the back portion of the property. Somebody had said, he had been hiding it. And so they went out there, and Dill wouldn't come out of his trailer. His father was out there with him. His uncle was out there with him. His uncle had been talking to the police, and his father came out, and his uncle went back in, and his uncle had only been in his trailer for a few minutes when he heard a gunshot. And the uncle ran out screaming. He shot himself, and everybody. And then some people ran the other way. The people that were just there, but Osborne and everybody else ran to the trailer. And Dill had shot himself in the head with probably a .22 caliber pistol, and he expired soon after that. So this all happened late in the evening. So Walthall got a phone call in the middle of the night, and he said Marvin Dill's dead. Osborne told Walthall that Dill's dead, and he said, "I'd like you to take a look at the body." And Walthall said, "I will." He said, "I'll have one of the patrol officers come over and get you." And he had some lady patrol officer. She came over and got him. But before he got off the phone, Walthall asked him, he said, "Did Dill say anything about Heather?" He said, "No." He said nothing to anybody. He just killed himself. So the officer drives him over to the funeral home, and the medical examiner was I think he had already performed the autopsy on Dill. He looked at the body type. Everything that he had described to Osborne, according to Osborne, was fulfilled in Dill's body type, the way he was. Now, it's not hard evidence, but they were satisfied. So the patrol officer said, "Are you sure that this is the man you saw through the telescope?" He said, yes. She said, are you 100% sure? He said, how can anybody be 100% sure of anything? But yes. And I remember Walthall telling me that when he heard that he was a suspect in this rape, in this cemetery war, where the person who did this wore a fish net, net, like a mosquito net across his face, he said that was why I had trouble seeing the face. So I say in the story that all we know for sure, and I name a number of things off about this, is that, she's gone, she's dead, and for some unknown reason, he killed himself before he could be questioned by the police. So it's a case that's never going anywhere. Walthall even, and he helped Heather's mother for about years. This guy owns a business, and he had the money to do it. And he organized searches and paid for those. He hired several psychics. Nothing came of that. He thought something was going to come of that at one point. It didn't. But he did everything that he could, and they've never found this girl. Well, what's interesting is that, in most cases, these abductions, they say that the victims are dead within several hours. I mean, that's not always the rule, of course, but a lot of times they are. I will say this: when Oz, and I had forgotten to mention this, because he was the only person that saw the killer, even if he didn't get the greatest look. When Osborne got to the beach that day, Walthall couldn't stand just standing there anymore. He just couldn't take it, just talking over the phone. So he got in his boat. A neighbor went with him, and he went across the river and met Osborne. They walked around to where there was like a sand berm or something that was blocking, and this person who abducted the other two had taken her that way, and she went out of sight. Well, when they went to that area where they had to have gone, where they were no longer in his view from across the river, they said that the sand was very gouged up in many places where they were struggling. And, her feet were digging in, and he was maybe losing his balance. Because he had a gun on her, but he didn't shoot her there. But he was wasting no time with what he wanted to do because he had ripped off her bottoms there. So however he transported her, conscious or unconscious, to the vehicle, whoever did this to her, she was already nude. And, of course, whoever this was had to take her to his car and take a chance on being seen. They had scoured that area. They could not find her remains. And I can't imagine whoever did this, for example, raping her and killing her within 200 or 300 yards of there and then burying the body. I just don't think that would have happened. Besides, there was a vehicle seen to be leaving soon afterwards. And according to one witness, it was that red and white Bronco. So it looks like that, they told me at the state police over there when I interviewed them, and they taped it, I taped it. There was about, 8 of them in there, 6 to 8 of them, patrolmen, maybe a detective or two, and Lieutenant Osborne. I was able, through my research, to come up with some material that surprised them, and they asked me how I got that information. And I said, by interviewing people. They said, well, that has to be because it was not in our reports. But I identified that they know this girl that lived through the cemetery attack knows what kind of pistol he had, and I believe it was a silver one, silver revolver, I believe. I'd have to check the book. But the 2 weapons that Dill had on him in Evansville were of blue steel. One was, I think, a Taurus. One was something else. But, I think that they might have been both automatics, but they were not silver. But I believe the gun that Walthall saw, I have to check the book again, that was also silver. Anyway, there was a few things I came up with, and I also learned the name of Heather's boyfriend, who incidentally was supposed to meet her later that day at the beach. Of course, if he showed up, and I never talked to him, there was just a whole party of police by that time. But what was interesting is that when the news crew showed up and started filming, and there's Osborne standing with Walthall, he told Walthall, he said, you need to go back to your home. You're the only person that's seen this individual. and it's going to be all over the news. So we'd rather you go back home, and we don't want this guy searching you out so that you'll become a second victim. But most of these men who kill women, they're afraid of men, and they're not going to bother men. They're too busy bothering women. Be that as it may, he didn't want any undue trouble coming to Walpole. But it's a very, very strange case with and it's completely open. Officially, the case is still open. But all the police officers said to me, that's official. We all know who did it. That was their statement. And, I can read between the lines. It's a closed case. It's like an O.J. thing. When they lost the case against O.J., the LAPD didn't go looking for Nicole Brown's killer. It didn't happen. So in their minds, it's a case like that. But like I say, it's circumstantial evidence, but it sure is a terrible thing. And so what would have caused Dill to kill himself? What would have caused Dill to say, I'm looking at 20 to life and I'm not going? So that's what we're left with.
Did you find any evidence that the police acted untowards in terms of making threats based on that criminal sexual background that he had and the circumstantial evidence that they felt they really had, including the red Bronco and the videotape of the red Bronco? Could they have pushed him into suicide, or
no? They were real delicate. Now something did happen. They had their lights on the trailer had gone on and off a couple of times, and there were some people that later said that was like black ops or whatever that the police were doing. But Osborne told me, he said, we wouldn't have done that. Listen, Osborne told me, he said, we had the warrant. We could have gone on the property, knocked on the door and said, we're coming in. They did not do that. They waited off his property. And then Osborne was way back from the trailer, ended up with some of these other officers talking to Dill's father. So there was no threatening stuff going on. They were taking their time. When you have a warrant, and they could have taken one of those things and bashed the door in and said, we're coming in, guns blazing, not firing, but pointed at Dill. They chose not to do that. So some people think that the police caused this, but it didn't. And I think what caused it is that whatever was bothering Dill, he didn't want to talk about anything about Newburgh Beach or this missing girl. And again, you got to read between the lines. If he thought it was a parking ticket, he's not going to send a piece of lead through his head. So that's why he did it. Now, and I'm sure his wife understands why he did it. She had asked him if he had been to Newburgh Beach once these calls started coming in and things started heating up. And I can't remember. He may have denied it. Now, I spoke with Detective Lanny Allen, who went to see Dill when he became a suspect in this attack on this woman in the cemetery. He said, he said his body fit the description. He already knew about the fish net. She couldn't quite see all the face, but his body type fit the description of what the lady gave him. Now, he took some Polaroids of Dill, and Dill, did not object to that. And when he showed it to her, she said, I can't really say for sure, which was strange because after Dill killed himself and his picture showed up in the paper, she said, I don't know why. I said I couldn't identify him from the Polaroids because that's the guy. And I've got the report. In Lanny Allen's report, he said the suspect in this case, meaning the cemetery attack, took his life as officers were trying to serve warrants on his property, and this case was closed. So in Lanny Allen's mind, there is no doubt who attacked the woman in the cemetery. In the Kentucky State Police mind, of all these officers who worked the case, there is no doubt in their mind who killed Heather Teague. They just can't come out and say it. And the people that arrested him in Indiana, and listen, if you notice, whoever did these things, sexual attack in the cemetery, The woman was allowed to go, whoever did it. Arrest in Utah, I must be thinking about the funny case. Arrest in Evansville had to do with, there's a shovel, there's the rope, there's the duct tape. Who knows? Why did he have that? Well, let's read between the lines. And so if that was for nefarious reasons, and if they're right about him having been involved in the Heather T. case, if they're right about that, I don't know. If they're right about that, like they think they are, then it might have a bad end. All we know is she's gone and has never been found, and he killed himself because he didn't want to talk about her or Newburgh Beach.
What's most interesting though too is the vivid portrayal of how the real haunted character in this is Tim Walthall. In terms of, he's going to carry this story to his grave, and
he was very affected by it. Yeah. In fact, he doesn't use the. I asked his wife recently about it. It's funny, I never asked her back then, but I originally wrote this story probably, 10, 12 years ago. No, I'd say about 15 years ago. And then I touched it up and added some new stuff to it. But I asked her about it a few months ago. She said, no, he put that up about 4 months after this happened. It kind of ruined it for him, It's like you can't go home again. And he never expected to see that. And like I say, that's why I said it was like something out of Alfred Hitchcock. The movie Rear Window, that the guy sees from his window. He's laid up with a broken leg, and he's in this apartment complex. He sees one across the way from him. A murder occurs. And so it's one of those deals. And the only person that sees it is the guy sitting with a broken leg. And here in Tim's case, he's just saying, no, just think about it, if he wouldn't have seen this. Nobody would. The only thing they'd find is she's gone. They wouldn't know anything. And whoever did it would just be out there killing again.
Yeah, and he has so many unanswered questions. It's not like he witnesses the murder. He just witnesses an abduction, then
he witnesses the abduction.
And he doesn't know anything.
No, and where her body is, only God knows. Because they have just done one search after another. And I mean, that's the thing. If you go back to the Bundy case, as we've talked about, he said once, people that I buried have never been found. If you take the time to bury, there's a good chance they'll never be found. If they're found, they might be found accidentally. It's even sometimes when you leave bodies in rural, remote areas, the animals will take care of them, and even the remains may never be found. Maybe years before somebody comes across something that even resembles a human bone. Or they may never. But whatever happened to Heather Teague, she was probably hastily buried. And, so that's just it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to move on and just cover a few more stories in this incredible collection.
Yes.
But I like the next story that you have in the Valley Drive-In double murders. This is a really tragic story, but again, super twisted. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I was 18 years old when that happened, and I was born and raised in Louisville. And I've been to the Valley Drive-In many times. It is on the outskirts. It's gone now, but it's kind of like on the outskirts of Louisville along a road called Dixie Highway, which Dixie Highway leads from Louisville and goes all the way to Radcliffe and to Fort Knox. But this thing kind of sat out on the edge of Louisville. And this was one of the cases that I didn't know where to get the information. I was talking to my friend who's now deceased, James Massey, who actually is the fellow that introduced me to Jerry Thompson and got the Bundy, murders, rolling. And I asked him one day, I said, do you remember this case where they had a couple ticket takers abducted from a drive-in on different nights? He said, oh, yeah, I do. And I couldn't remember the date. I wasn't sure. I knew it was June. I knew it was June. Couldn't remember if it was 73 or not. I wasn't sure. But there were some particulars that I didn't know about. But he was able to remind me of some names. And then when I got those names and of like the killers, and I had a firm date, I was able to check some stuff. I went to the Jefferson County Police Department, and that was before Jefferson County and Louisville combined, and now they're just Louisville Metro. Okay. And the Jefferson County Police Department, they had trouble finding this in the archives. There had never been anything else written about this case. And so I got the file to it. They finally located the file. And for those who read the story, it's really surreal. There were these two losers, and there's no death penalty at the time, so they've just been sentenced to life. But James Sefcek and Danny Lee Tetrick. And Tetrick had already assaulted people, and but up until this time, I don't think he had committed a murder. But if everybody, and of course the younger people don't really understand drive-ins. I mean, I'm sure they know something about them, but these used to be very, very popular. Mm-hmm. And many drive-ins, you go into them, a lot of times the ticket booth would be a little bit down the gravel road and not connected to some of the main buildings, like where they sell popcorn and all that stuff.
Right.
And there was this really sweet girl. She was in her senior year, Rita Robbins, and when I got the case file, you can't go over this stuff without thinking of the family, thinking of the parents, how terrible this was. When I originally wrote this, it was 30 years after. This was published in Snitch, this story, back in 2003. And it was a lead article, and when I got the case file, and of course there were all the pictures of the bodies being unearthed, and there's the pictures of these two misfits and how they were arrested and all that stuff. But there was a picture that was this is really sad. It was her high school picture for the year, and it had, I think Rita had just picked it up like the day or maybe a few days before, and the pictures had just come out. And so when this happened and her daughter went missing, and that's what ultimately happened, and that's what I'll get to, they had to turn in one of these pictures to the police, and I recognized what kind of picture it was the moment I saw it. But it's in the police property; it's part of the case file, so I was able to republish it. But what happened was, these two guys robbed and kidnapped this Rita Joan Robbins from the ticket booth one night. And it's very rural, and they pulled out of the gravel driveway, and if you take a right, you're heading back into a lot of stuff, and you'll ultimately go into the city of Louisville. If you take a left, you're headed out into, like, within a couple blocks, you're out of Jefferson County, and you're in the next county. I think it's Bullock. And they took her to a secluded place, and they counted up, she was trying to play along with them. I don't think she believed she was going to be murdered. And if it was left up to Tetrick, she probably wouldn't have been murdered. They're both psychopaths. But after she was kind of, they said, making a joke of it, counting up the money, splitting the money between them, trying to do whatever she could not to upset them. And with that, Sefcek took her in the car, made her get undressed, and he raped her. And then he got out of the car, and he said she's going to have to be killed now. So it was Sefcek's proclamation, if you will, that the girl should die. And he grabbed her with both his arms behind her arms and kept screaming 3 or 4 times, "Kill her, kill her, kill her." And Tetrick had this, and there's a picture of it in the book, this really long knife. and he had carved a swastika, painted the swastika on it. He was into Nazism. He was just a real misfit. And he stabbed her, I don't know, I think it's like 10 or 12 times. And the girl collapsed against the car, got blood on the car, and was killed, right? Well, you know, she's missing. Nobody knows why she's missing. Some people think, well, maybe she just, you know, took the money out of the cash drawer and left. But that didn't make any sense because her car was still sitting there. Her purse was still sitting in the booth. It didn't make any sense. About 2 weeks later, Ronald Shoemaker, a soldier from Fort Knox, you know, it's not that far from Fort Knox. He used to work part-time there. And, in fact, he was getting ready to leave the military. He was, you know, honorably discharged. He was getting ready to have all that happen. He was going to move to Louisville. He was going to keep working at the drive-in. Then he was going to enroll at the University of Louisville. And he was ultimately wanted to be an attorney. Well, 2 weeks later, he disappears. And it's the same two. They got him, and they murdered him. He was very nervous that night, extremely nervous, very on edge. As if, you know, some people get premonitions sometimes that something bad is coming. I personally think that Shoemaker had that. You know, there was a woman that worked in a bank here in Louisville a number of years ago on Chenoweth Lane here in Louisville. And she said she kept feeling for months, I need to leave this job. I need to leave this job. I need to transfer to another bank. I keep having a really bad feeling about me working here. She never did anything about it. The bank was robbed one day. One of the robbers hopped over where she was and shot her and killed her. Well, these things come to people sometime as warnings. And I think that Ronald Shoemaker had a premonition that something was going to go wrong, and it did. And they murdered him as well. Now, these people, you know, if you look at Petrick, he's covered in tattoos. He's just covered. He's got even obscene words on his body. I mean, these guys are the dregs of society. Now, later, as they were captured, again, there were people calling up and saying, look, there's a couple guys that were boasting that they killed these two young people. And apparently, some of the young people found out where Shoemaker was. And they had gone and viewed the body, if that's not strange, but hadn't yet called the police. And so these two brilliant people, Tetchek and Petrick, they say, well, you know, it was our plan to keep going back to this same location and keep abducting ticket takers. So apparently they weren't going to stop after two. Now, it's interesting because when I got the police report, I'm reading through it, right? And it actually goes, it says at one point, it says they weren't sure if it was foul play or not. They're still thinking that maybe she took off, maybe Shoemaker took off, and maybe they're together. And I'm thinking, hold the phone. And then, as the report goes on a little bit, he said, but all this is speculation. He said, we must assume that foul play, you know, is a part of this until we know otherwise. I thought, well, thank God for that. I don't think I put that in a chapter, but that's something interesting I found in the report. If I was the detective on that case, I would have assumed it was foul play from the moment I saw the circumstances. I wouldn't have considered it anything else until evidence said otherwise. But listen, no matter what air searches they did or ground searches, nothing. So they start getting calls about these two misfits. And so they bring these guys in on some other charges. I think Petrick had an outstanding warrant. So they brought him in. And pretty soon they broke him down. It took a while, but they broke him down. And Petrick actually admitted to, I believe it was the lead detective. He said he felt, and I've got it in the book, I've got the quote from the detective, but he feels like that he felt bad about maybe having done these things, and that he needed to get the girl home so her parents can have a proper burial. And so, you know, when this thing was published in Snitch, I'm always aware if there's any family members that are still around, how they're going to receive something. And there were some people that called. I got a call from the editor one day of Snitch, and he said, "Where did you get the picture of Rita Joan Robbins?" I said, "I got it from the Jefferson County Police Department. It's a matter of public record now." He said, you did get it from the Jefferson County Police? I said, "Absolutely." He was concerned that I might have gotten it from somewhere else and published it without the permission of the family, because somebody apparently in the family was very upset. I said, "I'm really sorry. They got a beef. They need to take it up with them because they never retrieved that photograph. It became part of the public record." So I said, "They're not going to do any." I told the editor, I said, "There's not really anything anybody can do." But some people were sorry. Now, most people that read the article were glad to read the article because nobody ever really knew the full story about it. These guys took a plea bargain. There was no trial. There are no transcripts. There is simply the police file, and that's what I was able to get. Had I not gotten the police file, this stuff would have gone down in the dust of history. I mean, it would have been forgotten, except for little incidentals that there was once a drive-in here in Louisville where 2 people were taken and murdered. There just isn't a lot out there on it. So I've heard from a lot of people that remember that case. A lot of people knew the killers, and they certainly knew Rita Joan Robbins, and not a whole lot of people, except for those that worked at the drive-in, knew Ronald Shoemaker. But can you imagine their lives just got snuffed out like that? And within this also, which you'll probably want to talk about, is the cheerleader one, which was really the toughest one for me to write. But before I get into that, what I want to do is follow the flow that you're in. So if you have any other questions about that or anything that you think I didn't cover on the driving killers, just fire away and I'll add to it.
Now, what I just wanted to ask with this last story was, you know, you talk about these guys being losers. We're talking, how much money were we talking here? I don't want to say the number, but I'll get you to say the number. What kind of money were we talking these masterminds were coming up with, of all the places? And what was their, why this place? Just because it was remote?
Well, here's the deal. You know, people that hunt other people, if they're smart, they won't always hunt in their area. Right. These guys hunted in their area. They hunted, within miles of places that they would go to and frequent. Listen, this Dixie Highway is, this driving's right off of it. Tetrick, I can't remember, might have been a month or two before this, he had stabbed some guy. He didn't kill him. As he was robbing him, that too was along Dixie Highway. And so these guys are living their lives in this area, and they're also committing crimes in the same area. They're not very bright individuals, but, a smart killer will go other places and hunt and conceal themselves, and they certainly won't talk about their murders. But these guys ran their mouths. So that's what really, here again, the bodies were sequestered somewhere and buried in shallow graves. Had Tetrick and Stepchek not talked, they probably wouldn't have found the bodies, and they might not have found them. They might have been arrested for other murders later, but they ran their mouths. But they were working it, so that's why they chose this drive-in. I think they felt comfortable taking the ticket takers because they were all alone. And I think Rita was grabbed around 11 o'clock, between 11 and 11:15. The people that owned the drive-in, their name was Hornsby. And the wife, I think she left around 11:06, said she had to run home for something. And she would be back. But by the time she got back, Rita was gone. And one of the workers there had come down to the booth and given Rita, like, a nice cold, 7-Up to drink. And that appeared to be untouched. So she disappeared very quickly. And here's the thing. Here's what police will tell you. If somebody has a gun on you, Get in the car. No, you run. Oh, well, they might shoot me. They're going to kill you if you get in the car.
Yeah.
Let them fire. Let them not fire. Chances are if they hit you, they're going to wound you. But if you get in the car, you're dead. This is how this stuff works. I guarantee you if Ronald Shoemaker would have run along the gravel, they might have fired a shot at him, but they might have just got in the car and left. But if you get in the car, you are dead. So, but people get frightened. They don't know what to do. That's what Shoemaker did. That's what Rita did. So these guys, everything was going their way. And they're so brilliant that they thought, let's just keep coming back to the same drive-in. Kind of like the guy that keeps coming back to the same store and robbing it over and over again. So, I mean that's how they think.
Yeah, incredible story. And, you know, what's really the super sad aspect of it is that especially Rita, she's just been working at this job a few days. She's 17 years old. I don't think you can get more innocent, sweet and innocent. And for a while there too, they have to look in her background. Possibly she's involved in a robbery or anything else, because they have to take whatever they have in terms of evidence. So thank God these losers did have a big mouth.
Yes,
thank God.
Because they would have killed again. And
absolutely.
Sefcek was the one who egged it on. That's why I say in the book, I had to provide the captions really for all the books I write. You know, usually the writer provides them usually. And I talk about how, and this is true, Sefcek liked to watch murders unfold, but he didn't want to do it. He liked to watch them unfold. He never killed any of these people. He had Tetrick kill them. Yeah. And Tetrick didn't rape the girl, but Sefcek did. But Sefcek wanted them. They're both psychopaths, but you know, he was the one that egged Tetrick on to do this. And they're just really something. Now, had the death penalty, of course, Kentucky's bad about putting people to death. I mean, we got people down on death row, 30 years here. I mean, we're almost as bad as California. But had the death penalty been in play, these guys, they would have. Old Sparky would have, gotten them by now, or maybe the Gurney. But and believe me, these people need to be dead. They need to be under the soil, and they don't need to be breathing air. That's just the way it is with these folks. But because the death penalty was on hiatus, as it were, and we were in between things, there's nothing else they could do with them but give them life.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we talked about the death of a cheerleader, and your other, just for our audience, they're curious. They're curious. The other chapters are called A Mother's Love, and which is alluded to in the synopsis, Doctor Strange and the Severed Head, and then the Sleepover, which was also alluded to. But let's talk about, like you say, the very, very difficult to write Death of a Cheerleader. Tell us about why. Why did this case interest you so much? What was it about the case itself?
Yeah, it was a girl. Her name is Sarah Hansen from Greenville, Kentucky, and she was a really sweet kid, a good kid. She was an honor student. She was in band. She was just a really, really good girl, very active. She left her home one night. To rent a video. She had a boyfriend, and her boyfriend was coming over that night, and he was very busy with stuff he was doing. This was, I guess, a Saturday, and she had come with her. She was on a cheerleading team. She had been involved in a competition. She'd come to Louisville, and they won their competition here in Louisville, and then they went back that night. So she wanted to watch a movie with her boyfriend, so she goes to a place called the Minute Mark in this little town. I want to say sleepy town, a nice community. Certainly not the place. I don't think they had a homicide in the city for about 14, 15 years. And certainly nothing diabolical, and nothing like that which was about to happen. And she went to return this movie, and just call it the way I think, but there was a guy in there, and this came out later, and he saw her and he mentioned to somebody in there, he said, boy, would I like to have a piece of that. And he left the minute mark before she did. And there was one witness that said that this witness said saw somebody crouching by Sarah Hansen's van. But when Sarah came out, apparently he wasn't right there. But I think Sarah may have, because of the familiarity of where she was, and she knew people in there, and it's a nice little town. She may have left the door unlocked. Right. And he got in the van, he got in the back of it, and when she comes out, she's abducted. And the murder, when the paper first reported on the murder, again, this is a thing where, I hear a newspaper report. They had it wrong on how she was killed, but they talked about how horrendous it was. It bothered me so much when I heard it, I thought whether I write about it or not, I got to find out what happened to this girl. For my own self, I got to find out what happened to this girl and why. So I started investigating the case, and I started making calls, and I talked to a couple officers from the department, and I was able to get the transcript, oddly enough, released to me, because it was not yet a part of the public record because he hasn't been put to death yet, but it was in the hands of his attorney. And this guy actually released it to me, and he let me go through the transcripts, and I had so I had these things. I had a lot of interviews. I was able to copy a lot of stuff, and I pieced everything together as to what happened. It's really, if you read the chapter, it's almost like a moment-by-moment thing. Yeah. Now, what bothered me is that, I've written a lot about murder, and I've done the Bundy murders, and if anybody's read my book, The Bundy Murders: A Comprehensive History, I go into great detail as to what happened to his victims. And this is just the kind of psychopath that we're dealing with. But this particular murder really troubled me. And it's the only time this ever happened to me. A couple of nights I woke up in a cold sweat, breathing hard, just in a cold sweat, because it was on my mind. Most troubling thing to write about. This particular girl, and I won't go into great detail here, but if people read it, they'll understand. The way this guy, he took her, he forced her to drive to Luzerne Lake, which was on the outskirts of town. And he attacked her with a box cutter. And he raped her on the back seat, and he cut her throat. But he did not kill her. It took a while for her to bleed out. She didn't lose consciousness. He didn't sever an artery. It was so bad that they matched the blood pattern from the neck on the front, it was like a 3-seat van, I guess, and he had pushed her neck up against it as he raped her from behind. He tore her bra off, he tore her pants off, such physical force, and the blood pattern. Well, she did not die for quite some time, a number of, 15, 20 minutes, I don't know. The attack was over. He was dragging her to the lake. Finally, as he was dragging her to the lake, I don't know if she had completely expired by the time he threw her in the water, but I can't remember. I have to check my own book. She might have taken a few breaths in the water. She might have had some water in her lungs. I can't remember. It was the most horrible. It's one thing to be killed. It's another thing to be killed like that. And so, I wrote the story on it, and I remember interviewing. This also was in Snitch, and the story I wrote is perfect. They sent somebody down there to interview a couple people, and they got some information wrong when they went down there, but they didn't find that van for a couple of hours after searching for her. And when they sent somebody down there, somebody told them, they found the van in a few minutes. That's not true. I've spoken to the officer, Doug West, and West was a seasoned officer. He really didn't have a lot of homicides. You know, he's used to stuff. He's used to coming up on creepy scenes. They're out looking for this girl, and Officer Harvey's out, Officer West is out, family members are out, and West told me, he said, you know, I thought I would go to the lake just to see, just to see. He said, as I rolled in, it's all dark. I think it's around 10 o'clock now. He said, as I rolled in, my lights shined on the van ahead of me. He said I could see that the driver's side door was open, and there was no life of anybody around. He said, you know, I've never had a problem with fear. He said, but I got to tell you, that bothered me. He said I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up.
Wow.
So he drew his service weapon, and and which is wise because you don't know what's out there. And so as he approached the van, his lights were still on the van. He could see that there was a lot of blood on the side of the outside of the van. He also looked in, and when he looked into the van, he said, "There's just blood everywhere. There's just blood everywhere. There's blood in the back seat. There's blood in the front seat." And what I found out is that from the evidence, she fought him, even though her throat had been sliced, even though her windpipe was sticking out. She fought him and tried to drive that van out of there. And that's why there's all this blood in the front seat area. Where she got the strength to do this, I don't know. And the blood on the outside of the van came from when she was taken and he was pulling her along the van. I think she might have even then tried to break away and he pulled her back. I don't know. But she was able to walk and be, it wasn't a full drag. She was trying with effort to go along. And then when Officer Harvey got there, he had West secure that portion of the scene. And Harvey reported that after a while it was just drag marks. It had gone from two people walking or basically one with feet marks, on the ground, stumbling, whatever, to just drag marks. He was dragging the body. And she still may not have been dead, but she was not able to resist or to do anything. And so, it's the worst kind of murder that I've heard of. I mean, it's just really bad. So anyway, when I was doing this, I don't normally bother the family, but it's a small town, and so I thought, and maybe I was being naive, but I thought maybe I owe it to the parents. I know they've heard about me. I know they've already heard about me. To call them up and just to introduce myself and see if they needed to ask me any questions. So I called one morning, and she answered the phone, and she got her husband on the phone, and they were both on different phones. And we were talking about it, and I found out then, you feel so sorry for these people because time doesn't heal stuff. It just doesn't. It just changes. And when this guy went to trial, and they were only there, they did not go to the trial. They were only there 2 times. For the preliminary hearing or whatever, when he was being arraigned, they were there, and maybe the opening of the trial. No, they weren't there for the testimony. And they were there for when he was sentenced. But when I was talking to her, she thought for a second I was going to say something about information I had on my daughter. She said, no, don't tell me. I had no intention of doing that. But I learned from that, and I thought, you know what? Unless something really happens to where I need to speak with a family member, on future cases, I'm going to let this go. Because it was difficult for me, but I'm the one there, trying to find information, so I wasn't thinking of me. But it was very difficult for them, too. I felt very sorry for them. But that's the only case, and this was long before I talked to them, that woke me up in a cold sweat. It's horrible. Anyway, odd to think someone can kill like that. It's just terrible. It's monstrous.
Well, I've interviewed so many people and read so many books where we have those kinds of people, and that's people might look at America and say, well, how can you have some of the laws that you have and death penalty? And it's because of some of these kinds of killers. I mean, it's not just
some
because
people
of politics.
No. Listen, I was on the Generation Y podcast, and that's and I debated the death penalty with another guy. And listen, the death penalty very rarely stops murders. It isn't about preventing murder. It's not about that in my mind. It's about doing that which is right. And people do these heinous things, they need to go. But it's also about the family members. So many of these family members, they can't move on until these people who slaughtered their loved one is dead. And the fellow, he's a real nice guy, but the fellow I was debating, he kept thinking that was vengeance. And I kept saying, no, not vengeance. These people are so beyond anything like that. They're so changed as people. They just can't move on. So I'm a big believer in the death penalty for the victims, and also because I think it's intrinsically the right thing to do. Okay, a guy kills a guy for sleeping with his wife. Should he get the death penalty? No. A guy gets in a fight and kills somebody, gets the death penalty? No. Kidnapping people, murdering, diabolical stuff? Yes. Killing police officers? Yes. So there's manslaughter, and then there's flat-out homicide. So there's first-degree murder. So, but I hope we don't lose the death penalty, even though some states aren't carrying it out, because I think it's a good tool of the justice system. But again, that's my opinion. A lot of people will disagree with that.
Well, I did listen to Aaron and Justin and yourself and Tom Westcott discuss that, and
Tom's nice.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I say Tom's nice. Yeah, I think we had a good, lively time that night.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. I won't get into that because I have my own opinion, and what I just will say, and I hopefully don't open up the debate because I've expressed my opinion. But what my problem is that you really can't have a system because Canada, we don't have, as I explained on another program. Pardon me. Is that you really can't have a sense of justice or equality. We'll say equality, which has to be a cornerstone of justice, when you have one state doesn't have a death penalty and another state does, and one state enforces a death penalty and another one really doesn't. And the reason for some of them abandoning the death penalty is because of money, and you do have often, it depends on how good your attorney is and if you've paid for your attorney. And there are, as in Canada and in America, there's advantages to paying for your lawyer and paying well for your lawyer as well. So, again, equality kind of goes out the window. I understand, though, the sentiment. I understand the emotion. I understand where the victims might have the right to feel vengeance, whether it works or it's not right or anything. So I do understand, and especially...
Yeah, it's not vengeance for them, most of them. They're so changed. They're so beyond that. It could have been vengeance in the early stages. They're so beyond that. It's very difficult for them, the ones I know about, it's very difficult for them to put it to bed while their killer is still breathing, sometimes talking about the case, sometimes taunting them. It's for them. And as to states in the United States, that's the beauty about the states. Some states can have it, some states can't. If killers want to kill in a state where they don't have it, and that's important to them, maybe that's what they need to do. But, I think the moral implication of what these people do, I just personally believe, and there's a lot of people that believe like me, there's a lot of people that don't. I don't care whether one state does or it doesn't. I don't care if some people can hire a good attorney and some can't. When the evidence of these types of murders is overwhelming, I don't care. Those people need to go. And listen, I have felt the same way since I was 16, 17 years old. People that are that bad, Theodore Bundy needed to go. Overwhelming evidence. The clown guy, killed 33 boys. He doesn't need to be drawing breath. These people need to go. The world is a much better place when these people depart. So morally, I think it's a good thing. We may not have it always. And some people can say, well, and believe me, sometimes Bundy had good attorneys. Bundy, he just kind of torpedoed himself. He could have gotten life. It was offered to him. But the thing of it is, when they're like this, I just think they need to go. But like I say, a lot of people don't feel that way. It's been so settled with me. I'm 59 years old. Stuff was settled when I was a teenager. Anyway, but this book, the one story that's really where you talked about a mother's love, I actually lived next door to these people. They lived in my neighborhood. And what is really interesting about Margaret Seitz, now, Margaret Seitz, we left that home. If you look in the book, if you look at the picture, it shows their home. But if you look at the house right next to it, that was our house.
Wow.
And both homes were in the picture. And they moved in about, 8 or 10 months before we moved out and moved a couple miles away. But I remember Margaret, and I didn't really talk. I remember seeing her, and she has an older, son that did not die, and daughter, and I remember them, and then there was the two youngest children that passed away. They were not born yet, so I didn't know them well. But then when this thing happened, we had sold the house. My parents had sold our house to the lady that's now in the chapter. And the kids ran when they couldn't get in the house, when they couldn't get in the bathroom door where their mother was. And, of course, they didn't know that their two siblings were dead upstairs because she had killed two of them with a U.S. Marine K-bar knife that she had purchased. They ran next door to the lady that bought my parents' house. And when I went years later to do this story and gather information, she was still there. So she let us go through the house, and I asked her about it. And it produced pain in her even then. And it's a quiet neighborhood. It's a really nice neighborhood. Even to this day, it's very, very peaceful and quiet and very nice. Not the kind of thing would you ever have. And the woman obviously had mental problems. And her husband was a computer salesman, and he was out. He was just a normal guy, and the family was supposedly all normal. They were planning on taking a trip together. But she was plotting and planning, and nobody knew it, because I don't think they could ever figure out where she got this knife. And it came in a box, so she bought it new. And back then, the only place to really get this was to get in your car. She'd want to take a right and go up Lowell, hit Bardstown Road, and go straight down Bardstown Road, take a right, about 7-8 miles down into downtown Louisville, and visit the Army-Navy shops, which I don't even know if they have any more of these now. And you can get these K-bar knives at other places. But back then, that's really the only place that you could go. So she must have done that a number of weeks before that and was planning this. And then she picked a morning and murdered these two children, just savage. And, of course, I've got pictures of the crime scene. I couldn't publish anything that's graphic, and I wouldn't. But anyway, it's one of those things that rocks a neighborhood, and it doesn't get over. It just takes years. And then Dr. Strange and the Severed Head, which is a very strange. Can you imagine his name is Strange? Yeah. I mean, come on! Yeah. I can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
That's hysterical. But he's a research scientist, right? He's got a bunch of letters after his name. Decides to go into the ministry. His first wife died. He comes to a church in Louisville, well-known church in Louisville, 9th, meets a lady named Kathleen O'Hara. They fall madly in love, and he's got a couple of kids, and beautiful wedding. It's really nice. And the proverbial marriage made in heaven, right? I had to do these puns, man. You have to forgive me, but within 2 years, she's dead, and he's charged with her murder. And if you get into the story, it's exceedingly strange. And what he ends up doing, he decapitates her with an axe and buries her head in their vegetable garden, and enlists his son to help him do this, not in the murder, but in the burying of her. So it's a very, very, very strange story. It's just like what you say. A lot of these stories are just like right out of the Twilight Zone. And, they're very strange.
Yeah, they're very, it's always a cliche when people say that, and there really is some writers and that sort of specialize in the more gory stories. And, you work with Ted Bundy and then your book Vampire with Richard Chase. So,
yes.
It's not like you're mining gore, but, geez, those are some of the goriest stories out there as well. And these stories like Twilight Zone, if people remember that type of show, that the twist is incredibly a twist. It's not, twist is an understatement, and it really is horror. It really, because that's what Twilight Zone were. They were fictional horror stories. But I think what this is that we show that you definitely demonstrate that it's much stranger than fiction, but it's also very much like a modern horror story set in the last 50 years.
It really is. It's very weird. There's a lot of homicide cases out there, but these very strange ones kept popping up. And the book that will be published in fact, Vampire, the Richard Chase movie, Vampire, the Richard Chase Murders, is going to be re-released by Wild Blue Press, and I'm adding additional modern-day photographs to it as well. And that I took of real evidence that I had, that I was able to photograph while I was out there, and some of the homes. So, and another book that Wild Blue Press is going to do has to do with other Kentucky murders, and they're just as bizarre. There's some strange things, and people do some very diabolical things. But like I say, sometimes they're with a real twist, and that's what I kept finding over and over again with these Kentucky cases. And funny, there was there were other cases I could have chosen, and you can only write so many. And I had to pass over some that were almost equally as strange, but I almost had to grab just from the lot that were what I consider to be the best ones, the most interesting ones, the ones that had the most, they were unique and they had that sort of twist to them.
Yeah, and they're really unforgettable stories too, and so I congratulate you on really finding and unearthing some stories and bringing them to light and bringing them to an audience. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about Death of a Cheerleader. And this is
great. I enjoyed it.
Notorious USA, and so there'll be more volumes of this because, like you say, thankfully the psychopaths have been very, very prolific, and so it makes for incredible stories.
Yeah, they sure provide the material to the writers, don't they? Yeah, I'd like to say, I always like to point out in my stories, without coming out and saying it, the things that people need to do to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. Always lock your doors. Things are normal until they're not. And I just want to say this for the audience. If anybody's in a habit of not locking their car doors or their house door, their homes at night, do so. Yeah. Because Richard Chase tried to get in the home once and the door was locked, and he went to the next house and murdered somebody. And they asked him about that, and he said, "Well, they didn't want me in. The door was locked." Of course, he was not legally insane, but he was deeply mentally ill. He wasn't clear thinking like a Theodore Bundy. But there's a lot of people can do to protect themselves and not become victims. And I think the more people know about how this stuff works, the better off they'll be.
Well, absolutely. And it's just amazing when you look at some of the cases like the Night Stalker, where that's exactly what happened. People were, in that time in California, I'm going to keep my window open. And so you keep your window open, your back door, and these people, whether they think they're being guided by voices, that window open means something, and certainly then they're going to do something, or they're just a cunning psychopath that says, you know what, it's very, thanks for leaving your window open or your door open, thanks.
This Kentucky book and another book that Gregg and I wrote, two other books were we did cases out of Ohio and then out of Pennsylvania. And one of the stories I did out of Pennsylvania was about a kid named Allie Kreider who murdered his best friend, and his parents in the middle of the night. And they kept their door open. And the reports I've received that a lot of people did. So when I was talking to the county attorney, I said, is this true that before these murders occurred, a lot of people in these neighborhoods would keep their doors unlocked? He said, yeah, a lot of them would. To me, that is absolutely shocking. There isn't any way. I've been this way all my life. There isn't any way I'm going to sleep in a house or any place and not lock my doors. It's not going to happen. But some people think that way. And then, lo and behold, something evil comes their way and something diabolical happens right near them. People have a tendency to think those things happen elsewhere. What they need to understand, but apparently a lot of people don't, those terrible things can happen anywhere at any time, and people need to take the proper precaution. But I like to say, my wife knows this, I don't get shocked very often. But just hearing the guy tell me that people in these neighborhoods in this day and time, a lot of them would not lock their door. I thought, man, it's like another world to me. I would never think that way. But people think that everything's normal until it's not. And unfortunately, when it's not normal, if it's heinous, if it's diabolical, it can have some really bad effects for those involved. So it would behoove people to lock their doors, and if possible, and they are comfortable with it, arm themselves, and just pray that nothing bad ever comes your way. But if it does, you're prepared for it. That's what I like to point out in the book. Just be prepared. Just do what you can do to help yourself and lock up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, almost every true crime book I ever read was a cautionary tale, and there has to be something to be learned from it, and I think that's where the great audience really is women who can really identify being sometimes often a victim of lesser things, but I think they really can relate to some of these victims who were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And
yes,
and certainly,
that's
so
true.
Foul play ensued. Yeah,
that's
Kevin,
right.
For those that would like to see what else you've written and also maybe contact you, do you do the Facebook thing, and how might people contact you? And do you have a website? Let us know about that.
No, I've joined the ranks of Wild Blue Press, and I'm getting stuff uploaded to Wild Blue Press now, but they can visit me at Wild Blue Press in the days ahead, and that's Wild Blue Press, and I'll have information on there. I can blog from there. I'm also on Facebook, and they can find me there, and I have been answering questions for over 5 years about Ted Bundy at a site called executedtoday.com. And if you go to executedtoday.com, if you're interested in Ted Bundy, they did a Q&A with me back in January of 2009 before my book, The Bundy Murders, was published. And, I hung around and answered some questions, and if God is my witness, I thought there'd be 12, 15 questions. Well, we're over 7,000 posts now, and really, it's probably one of the longest threads on the internet, and it's been over 5 years, and people still ask questions, and we have slow periods, and we have very busy periods where people are asking questions. And so if anybody has interest there, they can find me there. They can find me on Facebook, and pretty soon you'll be able to find me at Wild Blue Press. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on all the reissues too, and I know Wild Blue Press is really a great opportunity for authors. A publishing company run by authors, for authors, letting authors do what authors do. Fantastic!
Yes.
What a concept! And and so you're in great company. And we've had those people on the program, of course, and Burl and Caitlin and Ron Francel and yourself and Steve. And if I'm missing anyone, I will. Fred Rosen, of course. So it's a great stable of great guys and writing some great books. So I want to thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah, and I want to say I'll be on Burl's show, Burl Bear's show, if anybody wants to listen, on November 8th. And that's also lively over there, too. So,
absolutely. Anyway, Burl's the best.
All right,
Howard and Burl. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to listening to you on Burl's program, and you have a great evening, and hope to hear from you soon with Volume 2 of Death of a Cheerleader. Thank you very much, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.